Okay, here we go. Welcome everybody to Syosset Library virtually for lunch. My name is Jessica. I'm the Community Engagement Specialist here at Syosset. My librarian co-host today is...
Hi, I'm Stacy Mencher, Reader Services Librarian.
And we are here to welcome a really great author who is... Where are you right now, Rachel?
I'm in Dublin, Ireland, which is where I'm from and which is where my book is set.
So for you, it's like right about like early dinner time, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's 5 o'clock over here.
So we're having lunch and it's right before dinner time where you are. But before we get going, I just wanted to give a few housekeeping rules. This is a fun, friendly conversation. It is also in webinar mode, so that means that we encourage the audience to engage through the chat and the Q&A functions. However, as I mentioned, this being a fun and friendly conversation, we ask that you keep the conversation on topic of book and polite. Any semblance of abusive language, hate speech, racism in the chat or the Q&A will have you immediately removed from the meeting at the host's discretion, which is not what we're anticipating, but we do put that out there. So with that out of the way, we have our amazing author, Rachel Ryan, who wrote this book, The Woman Outside My Door. Stacy, do you want to add something before we turn it over to Rachel?
No, I'm just very excited.
I'm very excited as well. All right, so Rachel wrote this amazing thriller, and you are not here to watch us talk about it. You are here to watch her. So I am going to put the spotlight on Rachel and let her tell us about yourself and tell us about this book and how it came to be.
So I am 29 and I live in Dublin, and I knew I wanted to be a writer from when I was a little girl, very small. I used to write books in my copybooks. And then when I was in my 20s, I started to figure out that the kind of books I loved reading the most, or the kind of books that I leaned towards when I was emulating writers, were page turners and big twists and the kind of books you just couldn't put down. So that kind of became my aspiration. I wanted to write the kind of book that a reader would read in a day, because I realized that they were so often the kind of books I went looking for. So from that vision, and with a lot of perseverance and a lot of rejection and a lot of bumps along the way, I eventually had my first novel picked up by Simon & Schuster, which is The Woman Outside My Door. So I'm really pleased with the book, with the artwork on the front. I'm actually obsessed with this cover.
Oh my God, it's beautiful. It's like
really eye-catching.
This is the hardback one, and I'm obsessed with it because it has this like gorgeous spine underneath as well. So I love that one so much because it has that permanence element to it with the gorgeous spine. So I got really lucky with everything, and I'm so excited about the book. And it's a psychological thriller, and it's about a young mother with a 7-year-old boy, and she's going through a difficult time in her life. And when her son comes to her with these stories about this imaginary friend, at first she thinks he's making it up, but then strange things start happening, and she begins to wonder if his imaginary friend is real. So it's a very domestic novel. It's a novel about family and motherhood and relationships and secrets. And it's a novel which blurs the line between what's real and what isn't, and makes the reader question everything.
It's really, really good, and there's a lot going on in it. The family. So this is okay. So just so everybody knows, this is a spoiler-free. Spoiler-free. So we have to dance around a lot of different things. There's a lot about like the instinct of the mother knowing something is wrong, and everybody around her just sort of being like dismissing it. Where did that theme come from? Do you see that a lot in people you know? And
I think that a lot of the motherhood elements of the book came from the fact that when I was writing The Woman Outside My Door, I was working as a nanny. So I was, working as a nanny during the day and going home and writing at night. And I think it became really natural for me to write about children and write about, the rhythms of domestic life. The fabric of the book, among all these scary, twisty things, is the routine of the school run and home and picking up little bits of plastic that end up everywhere and you don't know where they came from, and all those little parts of rearing a child. And I don't have kids myself, so I think I got very lucky that I was able to have that experience of working as a nanny, and I was able to weave that tapestry in a detailed way. And I think that the reason that the little boy Cody in the book, he's 7 and he is insistent that this imaginary friend exists. And the reason I think I was able to write that was I had a front row seat every day in my day job to the rich imaginary world that kids have. And I began to really feel this urge to play around with that on the page, because I feel like kids exist in this world right beside ours, but they see everything differently. They see everything tinged with imagination, and they see things through a completely different set of eyes. And there's so much there to play around with if you want to blur that boundary. And then the mother, I don't think it's a massive spoiler to say she's got a history of mental health issues, and that affects her ability to distinguish between what's real and what isn't. So between her son's insistence on this friend being real and her own grasp of reality having been flawed in the past, things begin to get very fractured and very spooky very fast.
Maggie says in the chat that children are so imaginative, it's hard to know what to believe. And what you said, that when they're very insistent, like, no, like this, like really, I've seen it with my nephews who are, I was like, I should know their ages, like 3 and 6 respectively. It's just so interesting to see them be like, no, it's really this. And it's just like, is it? But I have to say, I love how creepy the book gets. And I didn't necessarily see that coming, but I feel, to me, it's creepy because it could be relatable. I mean, I don't have a 7-year-old child. My son's 1.5, but just kind of being like, what's happening? And like when people are, as Jessica said, dismissive of, like, it's kind of like, is this real? Like, is this like what? As if I'm like looking around the room I'm in. But it just, and I think that really makes it like, kind of be like, oh my God, like what's happening, adds to that, like, can't put it down. I need to know what happens next, which I know so many readers love. And I have to say, you've gotten really great blurbs from other writers that I'm really big fans of. So like Robin Harding or Liz Nugent, like they've loved the book. So guys, if you really love thrillers that are gonna just like make you absorb into the world, read or listen to it. Jessica read it, I listened, the narrator's great, and you just get pulled into what happens and all the twists and turns, which are really good. I have to say, I for one did not catch like the clues of what was gonna happen. I was like, what? As I'm reading, so just love it.
Yeah, and I think that element of not being able to put a book down and just not being able to stop, and being totally immersed in the world for however many hours it might take you to finish it, whether it's a few hours over a few days or a couple of weeks, or whether it's binge reading it in one afternoon in 6 hours straight. For me as a reader, I always had such admiration for writers who could do that, writers who could take me out of my own life for a few hours. And I speak about this often because I think it's an incredibly powerful experience to pick up a book where you pick it up, you turn the first page, and then you forget where you are, you forget your to-do list, your head is just, in this world. And that was the experience that I wanted to create for readers with The Woman Outside My Door. So when people tell me that they read it in a day, or when they tell me that it provided them with distraction during a difficult time, especially over the past year when I know a lot of people have been having difficult times. And I got some really sweet DMs from some readers who, outlined hardships that they were having over the year during the pandemic, and and, said, your book really gave me a break from that. For a few hours, I wasn't thinking about what was going on in my life. And yeah, I think for me, when those kind of responses are the highest compliment, because that was what I was trying to do the whole time.
Yeah, and thrillers have been huge during the pandemic.
It's a great escape that's not like,
Mhm.
I mean, I want to say not super far-fetched like other genres could be. Like, yeah, like I'm gonna read, Lord of the Rings. Like that's a big escape. You're in a whole other thing. But it's something that you could dig into. It's still, like I said, relatable because it could be like, yeah, this could happen to you or someone like of things going on. It's not otherworldly necessarily, but you knock it out of the park, Rachel. We do have a question from Anonymous who wants to know, what thrillers did you read when you were little?
When I was little, I think the first thriller that made me know that I wanted to be a thriller writer, or that made me realize just how expansive the genre can be, like the first thriller that made me realize that that thrillers don't have to be in a narrow box, that they can be character driven, they can be genre bending, was Erin Kelly's book The Poison Tree. And I don't know if anyone here has read it. I recommend it. It's fantastic. It's very atmospheric and rich, and it has a really powerful sense of place. I think I read it when I was 20, and I've read it so many times. And when I was writing The Woman Outside My Door, definitely for me, sense of place is really important. And I feel like in my novel, Dublin is a key, almost a character in the novel. It couldn't have taken place anywhere but Dublin. It's Dublin in winter, so it's this like cold, spooky, atmospheric sort of setting. And drawing that was really fun for me, and creating it and immersing myself in it and trying to draw the reader into it. And I definitely think that came from reading books like The Poison Tree growing up.
Good answer. Let's see. Oh, Lucy wants to know, did you particularly choose 7 years for Cody for a reason as a nanny?
That's a really good question. I almost thought about making him a tiny bit younger. I find children's ages in books is an interesting one, because in my experience of kids, they can be incredibly advanced and have incredibly defined personalities from a very, very young age. But when I think a lot of the time when people put that into books, readers, and I kind of understand this as well, readers can kind of think, oh, that kid is too young to be doing those things. That's implausible. And I think that that's a human reaction. People often underestimate children. I think like we do that a lot, adults, we underestimate kids. And I think if I had made Cody any younger, some readers might have found it implausible that he could have such a strong personality and contribute to the plot, because Cody as a character is he's not just like a passive character where it's like, oh, his mother's worried about him and that pushes the plot forward. So obviously his mother is very worried about him, and there's this real feeling that her son is in danger, but he pushes the plot forward himself. He's a very assertive, proactive character. He has a lot of agency. He makes decisions and takes actions which change the situation for him. So he is a key player in the story. And that was really fun for me. And he's a very bright kid. I loved writing him. It was an absolute pleasure. And I did consider making him 6. And I didn't want to take any readers out of the story by making them question whether or not it was plausible for a 6-year-old to be so proactive and so bright. And in order to eliminate that element, I decided on 7. So yeah, it was quite a conscious choice.
Yeah, I think I mean, it is an interesting age, because I have 2 6-year-olds, and they are sort of coming out of that baby time, and they have more agency, but then sometimes they'll come up with things that still you sort of have to question. Not as much as when they were little and you were just like, where are you even getting this from? Like, what did you watch?
Yeah.
Was it actually, so like my question right now is like, was it more difficult to write a child character versus an adult character? Because you have him, but then there's so much going on with the adults in this story that are all spoilers, and I don't want to say them. But there's stuff going on with the mom, there's stuff going on with her husband and her dad. Was that a difficult balance?
The reason I think it turned out effective was just because I had such incredible editorial advice. So my editors, Simon and Schuster, are amazing. When I brought the book to them, it was a manuscript. So it had kind of come out of my head and spilled onto the page. And I had all these ideas, like I could see Dublin in winter, and I could see a little boy who, this isn't a spoiler. So part of the plot is that the little boy's imaginary friend is an old woman. And that's part of what his parents find so unnerving and kind of eerie. And he says this old woman is his new grandmother. And his real grandmother passed away recently. So that his parents think that he's grieving her, and he's invented this imaginary grandmother. And then strange things start happening, like he discovers like candy wrappers, and his parents are like, where did they come from? And he's like, the old woman gave them to me. So yeah, it's very spooky, and there's almost a haunted feel to it. So I had all these ideas, and I had big ideas for the adults. The mother and her husband, they have a fractured relationship, and they're struggling with their own issues. As you said, the grandfather figure also is struggling in his personal life. So the family elements tied in with the atmospheric setting, tied in with the plot, it's a lot. And I think the way that you turn your manuscript into a finished book, which someone can pick up and read in a few hours, is with your editors. Editors are amazing, and they help us to turn our ideas and our characters and our big dreams and goals into something solid that you can hold in your hand. So that's how I gained control of all those different threads and plot points. It was with the guidance of an amazing editorial team, and I couldn't have done it without them.
Stacey, do you want to take that question?
Yeah, Lucy wants to know, did you write this during the pandemic?
No, I wrote it, I think in late 2017, I wrote the first draft. I was editing it. I was in the final stages of editing when the pandemic struck. So it was very much at that point where I was like, oh, this is going to go on for maybe a couple of months. So I was like, oh, that's not so bad. I can stay home and edit. And I was working in a lovely workspace at the time in Dublin city centre, a co-working space. I had a scholarship there. So I had been working on the edits in that space. And then I was working on the edits at home in my room. And yeah, I quite enjoyed working on the edits during the very early stages of the pandemic, because I had that solitude and isolation which you need when you're so focused on a big project. And I also had the process of promoting the novel during the pandemic. So Ireland was in lockdown for a really long time. Like, I think longer than any other European country. We've had a lot of lockdowns. So it was quite isolating, quite difficult. And I often had this feeling of stagnation. I'm sure a lot of people listening will recognize this very monotonous feeling of I would wake up and I'd be like, the same thing again every day with no breaks. And I feel so grateful that I got to launch the book at that time. So like, obviously it's not a great idea to be launching a book during a pandemic. It's not the ideal time for a debut novelist to be trying to push their book. The bookshops were closed over here when my book was published. So it was very difficult for the book. But the silver lining, and the thing I'm really grateful for, is at this very difficult time when I was trapped inside and my life was very monotonous and I felt very understimulated, I was able to do events, with people in America and Canada. I was able to, go on podcasts and do interviews and have all these new experiences that I'd never had before. I'd never done an interview. So I was able to have some firsts and learn some new skills and have some new experiences from my room. So that was a godsend. And it was one of the things that made the year bearable for me. So I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, I think like that's been a lot of us have found that in particular,
Yeah,
and
that silver lining to it.
being able to connect with people in places we probably wouldn't have done before. You know, like recently, actually just this morning, my coworker and I did a podcast interview with somebody in London. So it's just, it's not something I think that we would have done as much of before.
No, it would have been a lot harder. But like, because we're talking to you now, you're in Ireland and we're here in New York. And to be able to connect and do this event for listeners or people watching on the live or the YouTube, it's great to be able to do that, to be like, look, like we read this awesome book. We want to put it in your hands. Look, you could even talk to the author for like, you know, an hour or so. And it's great to do that. So I love that connection of the the pandemic brought that. It's been easier to have that outreach to authors.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I will agree with other authors we spoke to. It's not like the same as being able to be like, oh my God, hi, nice to meet you in person, you know, shaking hands and being like, oh, this is great. But it's really nice to still be able to be like, oh, like this is so much cooler. Like you could definitely connect more with more people this way.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really interesting that this is like your debut book and this is how you, because during the pandemic, you know, pretty much launched, the pandemic still happening, and the book came out in January of this year. But like, did it push back anything like the pandemic? Because you said you guys were in lockdown a lot more, or was it just kind of like not horribly affected?
It
I don't know
was
if that makes
challenging.
sense.
It was challenging because of the element of mostly the bookshops being closed. That was difficult. And I did missed out on the experience of, you know, as you were saying, meeting people in person, meeting readers in person. And I'm an extrovert. I love meeting people. I'm very chatty. I would have been in my element meeting readers in person. So I felt a lack of that. But mostly, I think that this year, if it did nothing else, it really encourages us to count our blessings. So mostly I'm just so excited and grateful that the book exists and it's a physical thing I can hold in my hands. Like the dream that I had when I was a little girl came true. And the experience of connecting with readers online, as I was saying, getting DMs from people who were telling me, I had tears in my eyes reading some of them, you know, because that element of, you know, I write thrillers, I don't write lit fic, I write books that are supposed to suck you in and entertain and keep you turning the pages. And to have people send me messages that were profound, really, you know, talking about how that slice of escapism helped them to handle, you know, a day when a loved one was in ICU with COVID. Those kind of stories were so meaningful, and really helped me to feel connected to the world when I could barely leave my room.
Go ahead, Stacy. I see you took
No,
that.
I was just marking it because on the Q&A we could mark things to answer live or type out an answer. This is actually one of my questions. Did you have input on the cover?
Did I have input on the cover? So basically, someone told me a long time ago, they were like, when you get your first book published, whatever the cover looks like, just say you're happy with it, which kind of scared me. So I was like, okay. So when Simon & Schuster sent me the cover for The Woman Outside My Door, I had those words ringing in my head. But I got really lucky when I looked at it. I was like, oh my God, it's gorgeous. So I love it. And I couldn't have asked for a better cover, I don't think. So I had already decided that whatever it looked like, I was going to say, I love it. But it was really nice to be able to say that totally genuinely. I think it really suits the book. I think it really captures something of the essence of the book. Because, you know, it's got the bright pink, which I think gives it a vaguely, like, obviously it's very stereotypical, but like a vaguely feminine twist. And it's a very domestic book. It's got a strong female lead. And then I think the black leaves give it this like atmospheric feel. And as I was saying, you know, sense of place and Dublin. And there's this, I often describe the setting as like Dublin through a Gothic filter. Like you're seeing this urban landscape with a spooky, haunted, sort of ethereal edge to it. And I think there's something about the cover that captures that. So yeah, I was all set to love it, but then I actually did just love it. So that was very convenient.
I think that I say this over and over again, but people, like, there are people whose jobs are to design books that are going to make you want to pick them up. Like, when you're talking about a person and you're like, don't judge a book by its cover, like, okay, that's like a really good analogy to make. You know, don't judge a book, like, don't judge a person by first glance. But like, when you are, as a librarian, and Stacy agrees, right?
I agree.
Do
I
do
judge
people
books
judge
all
their
the
books
time.
by their cover? Stacy?
Yes. Well, that's the thing. It could be librarian or bookseller or anything like that. Like, you want it to be eye-catching to grab someone's attention because you're competing against other books. Like in our library, the shelves that are to the side of me, you can't really tell, but some of our, like our new fiction, we have, you know, the books, and then there's space, and we have a book with the face facing out so you can see the cover of it. And you always want to put something that's going to be like, ooh, like make someone pick it up. And I think the cover really does that, because the juxtaposition of like the bright pink and then the dark leaves, and it does encapsulate your book, because you have the female protagonist, you have the dark, creepy atmosphere. And it's like, if you could just do like, you know, a screenshot of what your book's about to, like, you know, market it, which is what a book cover really is. It's a really good one, because sometimes you get book covers that they look really cool, but like there's not a huge relevance to the story or plot line. So the Simon & Schuster, you did a very good job, because I definitely judge books by the cover. I mean, we talked before we started recording about not wanting spoilers and whatnot, and I'll ruin things for myself for the fun of it, to be like, what's happening? I did that with a book because I catalog the books, I put in all the info, so I usually have to play around with the book and like open the pages, like skim things. And I happened to, it was Poison by Galt Niederhofer. I was looking at the back to see how many pages, and there's like a chart that she had at the back of the book of medical records, and I was like, why are there medical records? Like, what is this? What's happening? I got to read the book. And then I was like, I'm taking this book out. But I like beautiful covers, because it's not, and your covers not just like, oh, it's like, bam, here's this, but it's pretty, which I think adds another element to it, to someone, like if they're seeing it, and not necessarily like seeing like if there's a blurb on the front from someone and just the title and author, they're just like, oh, like this is interesting. So
I also think as an author, or especially as an author, you know, it's really important to recognize the expertise of the people you're working with. Like, I was lucky enough to be, you know, signed to Simon & Schuster. The people I was working with are incredibly good at what they do, incredibly skilled. And I think it's important to, you know, sit back and think, I've never designed a book cover before. Like, I'm good at writing, I'm good at plot, like I have a very specific skill set. But when it comes to designing covers, I'm going to hand it over to these people who I'm lucky enough to have working with me, and let them take the reins, because they know what they're doing. You know, I know what I'm doing when it comes to having an ending to a chapter that makes the reader go, I can't stop reading here, I have to read the next one. You know, that's my very specific skill set. And their skill set is completely different. And I didn't want to overstep. You know, if I'd really hated it, even then I would have had to sit back and think, well, why did they choose that? They know what they're doing. You know, they're trained and skilled and experienced. As I was saying, luckily it's fab and I loved it. But I think, like, if I was talking to an author who did have an issue with their book cover, I would say, before you say anything, you know, sit back and think about why they might have chosen that, because they are good at what they do, and they're trained and experienced and skilled at what they do. And, you know, they've made those choices for a reason. And I think it's something worth considering, because I know a lot of writers, and whether they're published or not, it's very easy to think of your work as your baby, and you want to have full creative control. And there is a beauty to having full creative control, and sometimes it's appropriate. But when it comes to publishing a novel internationally, it's definitely good to work as part of a team, because it's a big, big job with a lot of moving parts.
That's really great advice.
Yeah, I think so too. I really think so. It's really hard because I think a lot of people, like, I don't know, when you went into it, did you think you were going to have a lot of control about your over the book, or were you like just ready to collaborate?
I think I was at a stage in my life where I was old enough and wise enough to realize that creating a book that's market ready is a collaborative process. And I found the process of editing just amazing. And there's just no doubt in my mind. There was no doubt in my mind as we went through the process that the book was getting better. You know, after every draft, I was like, this is turning from a manuscript into a finished book that I think readers are going to enjoy. So that was an amazing feeling, even though it was really hard work. It was an amazing feeling. And yeah, I think when I was younger, maybe in my early 20s, I resisted criticism. I resisted the collaborative process. You know, I was probably really annoying to work with my critique partners and stuff, because I would just kind of say, no, you just don't understand my vision. You just don't know what I'm doing. Like, I was very young and very inexperienced. And again, I don't think that's always wrong. Sometimes you're clear on your vision and you should dig your heels in and say, no, I really feel in my gut that this is what I want to do. But a lot of the time, I'm going to go out on a limb and say the majority of the time, your editor has probably got a point. So you should listen to them. And the same, and we're speaking obviously more broadly in terms of not just editing the contents of the book, but in terms of the cover and all of that stuff. And yeah, I think that in all areas of life, it's good to be open to other people's suggestions and to resist our human urge, which I even find in my personal life, you know, that human urge to say, no, I don't need your advice. I know what I'm doing.
Mhm.
And it's so great to try and stop ourselves and catch ourselves and go, maybe this person does have something to teach me that I haven't seen yet. And chances are they do.
Yeah. So that, talking about working for the team for publishing your book, Lucy wants to know, did you use a beta reader?
So I was this very hardworking, very kind of isolated in my own personal life writer. I didn't really have a connection to a beta reader. And like, these are all terms that honestly, I only kind of learned when I moved over to Bookstagram. So Bookstagram is incredible. And I'm amazed by how supportive the communities are there and how much people are there for each other and help each other. And like, I didn't have that kind of writing community. It was really just me and my laptop. So for me, it was a very overnight shift. I went from having full creative control to working with a team of incredibly skilled editors who jumped on every word, like every sentence got torn apart. So it was a big shift for me. And luckily I was just ready for it. But I think all of the advice that I'm giving, or I don't know if it's advice, it's thoughts. I think all of the thoughts I'm sharing could probably be applied to the process of working with a beta reader as well, or any critique partner who, the only advice I would say is make sure they like your work. Make sure it's someone who reads the kind of thing that you read. If you're looking for a beta reader, reads the kind of thing that you write. There's no point having a beta reader who doesn't like romance if you're writing romance, because they're not going to understand what you're trying to do with the book. You know, if they only like gritty literary fiction with sad endings, they're not going to like your fun escapist romance with, you know, the champagne and bubbles and you get the guy at the end. You need to have a beta reader who likes and respects your genre, and then you're off to a flying start.
Actually, that's like a really good, I accidentally dismissed Maggie's question and now I just went to find it. Thrillers are such good distractions. Were you able to read during the pandemic? Because somehow I sort of feel like that fits very well with what we were just talking about.
Yeah, it does. And again, I talk about this all the time, like any podcast or interview I do, or anytime I'm asked to write a piece for a newspaper, I just start talking about the value of escapism and the value of thrillers and why it's so powerful. You know, some people who don't read thrillers, they can dismiss them, or people can dismiss the essentialism of escapism. It's so important. It's essential to us to be able to lose ourselves. So during the pandemic, I was able to read, and it was one of the things that got me out of my own head and got me out of my own flat. It was one of the things that kind of saved me. When I was a little kid and I was very young, I used reading in that way. You know, I would sometimes read books as a very deliberate way to get out of my own head and get it. Like I would read under the desk at school. I hated school, really hated it. And I would read under the desk. And I remember very acutely as a young child having this feeling of, I've cracked something very amazing here. I can open this book under my desk and then I'm in the Amazon rainforest and they don't know it. They think I'm sitting here in this class with them, but I'm not. I'm on an amazing adventure, you know, going down the river in a boat. And I remember having this feeling that I was cheating the system with this superpower, being able to open a book and go away. And as an adult, well, I still loved reading. I didn't experience it in that same way of escapism. I guess when you're an adult, you're not quite as bored, where I don't think I've ever experienced as an adult the boredom I experienced in school. But I found myself doing it during the pandemic because I had that feeling again of monotony and this is happening to me and I can't control it. I have to be here, much like school. And again, I had this feeling of, well, I can get out of this room. I can get out of 2020. I can get out of all of this and I can go to 1973 and go on an adventure through Vienna for a few hours and the pandemic can't stop me. And all I need is this book. That's how immersive I find reading. So thank God, yes, I was still able to read during the pandemic because it gave me some desperately needed breaks from the reality of what we were all going through.
What did you was there a specific book that you were referencing there with 1973? Because now I'm like, everybody get your pens out and write this down because this is what Rachel Ryan says you should be reading.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Ira Levine. He's best known for writing Rosemary's Baby and The Stepford Wives. So his books obviously have a big place.
Sorry, your reaction, Jessica.
I think Rosemary's Baby is a perfect thriller. I guess it's supernatural, but it's written like a thriller. It's written like a domestic thriller. Mm-hmm. Right up until the end and I don't think this is a spoiler because
it's not a spoiler. I mean, this is like decades old.
It's well known that Rosemary's Baby was the devil, but we only find that out at the very end of the book. So the first half of the book is really written like a domestic thriller. You know, it's very claustrophobic. She's in her apartment. She can't trust her husband. Those elements are really, really kind of timeless. I think they've over the decades. So anyone who hasn't read the book, really, really recommend it. And during the pandemic, I realized that Ira Levine had a book I'd never read before. And I had that feeling of, oh my God, there's an Ira Levine book I haven't read. I have to order it straight away. And the book was The Boys from Brazil. And I loved it. Couldn't put it down. It took me to Brazil. It took me to Vienna. I went all over the world hunting Nazis. That's the plot. It sounds wild. It's amazing. And I remember putting the book down and having that feeling that I'd been on an adventure. A swashbuckling adventure. That's what it felt like.
That's so funny. I had no idea that he wrote that. I knew that there was a movie, The Boys from Brazil, and Bad Librarian. I did not know it was based on a book, and I did not know. Wow. Yeah, Rosemary's Baby is very much like one of those, you know, I guess like back in the day when it came out, it had a lot of those twists and turns, like, is this just her, you know, experiencing like some sort of like postpartum psychosis? Is this like just, you know, like what's going on here? And it could, without that end, it could just pretty much be a creepy story of a young mother feeling isolated. But then it's like, but actually.
Yeah, right.
I think he was right all along.
But if we take out the baby is the devil element, it's absolutely a domestic thriller. Like when I would categorize it as one because he plays around with that uncertainty. Is it or isn't it? Again, I think the influences are so clear, like in my own novel, that kind of is it or isn't it kind of, is she right or is she crazy? And making the reader jump back and forth between, oh no, she's crazy. And then, oh no, this is tangible evidence. And then, oh no, she's crazy, jumping between those two ideas, while hopefully being respectful of her mental state and the realities of it. At the part of The Woman Outside My Door, when I went into the details of her mental illness, that I really labored over that section, not just in terms of the structure and the creative process, but in terms of wanting to be accurate and medically accurate, you know, wanting to get it right. Like, postpartum psychosis is real and terrifying and devastating for people. And I really wanted to deal with the mental health element in a respectful way. And it's not a spoiler to mention again that she's mentally ill. It's quite an early part of the novel, and the mystery continues to jump back and forth between what's real and what isn't, regardless of the fact that we understand that our protagonist has a history of mental health issues. So yeah, it was something I tried really hard to get right, because I didn't want to handle such a real and delicate topic in a clumsy way.
I think you did that because
Lucy actually had a question regarding that, but go ahead.
Yeah. No, because I want to say a lot of people will use it kind of like as like a trope and kind of just like as a throwaway. Well, like, oh yeah, this happened. And in your book, like, you know, you give like, here's like a reason, here's some info behind it, some history that makes it like, I mean, I can't say it's relatable to me because I didn't go through that with my child, but it's something that's serious and, you know, isn't just kind of, oh, well, here, this is kind of like an explanation. I'm just going to throw it. Because a lot of authors or other people that write stories with characters like that kind of just use it as a throwaway, and then it kind of diminishes the importance of like, no, this is a serious topic. It affects things. So I think you did a really good job with that.
Yeah, I'm actually curious about that because there's been a lot of books recently that have really, you know, like written by women who have really dived into postpartum psychosis, and it's been so well done, but I don't think it's not the same anytime I read about it. So when I was, you know, again, like when I was reading The Woman Outside My Door and it was sort of dropped, I was like, and you know, like this is also very sensitively written.
Yeah, I think it's becoming a topic which is more spoken about now, which I think is fantastic, because a lot of women who experience it have never heard of it before. So for anyone who's listening who's not familiar with the way that it happens, is that postpartum psychosis often occurs in people with no history of psychosis. This is the first time they've ever had any experience like this. So to them, this was not a risk, and then they have their baby, and then immediately, you know, I think the time frame is something like 72 hours, immediately start experiencing, you know, hallucinations, paranoia, like very extreme mental health issues, very rapidly. And it's something that, and I don't have stats to hand, and I didn't check up on them before I speak, so I want to be very careful here that I'm not putting out misinformation, but it's something that my understanding is that it responds very well to treatment, and people generally recover very, very well and totally from this illness. But it's incredibly serious and intense and scary, and so many women have no idea when they have a baby that this could happen, and often their family members have no idea. You know, see, obviously one of the problems with psychosis is that people they don't, even if they were aware that this was a possibility, when it happens, the trick it plays on your brain is that you think what's happening is real, so they might already be able to identify it anyway. But if, you know, maybe if people's partners were aware that this was an issue, they could pick up on the signs, and maybe things might not escalate so much. And actually in my novel, Georgina, our protagonist, her husband has training in psychology and mental health issues, and he's familiar with some of the risk factors. So he recognized that her erratic behavior wasn't just the baby blues, it was something much more serious, and he was able to help get her treatment very, very early on. So yeah, I was researching all of that and trying to understand, you know, what's it like for people when their partner comes home from hospital and suddenly starts saying really frightening things, you know, like this isn't our baby, or something bad is going to happen to the baby, or, you know, there's someone in the house, things that are obviously delusions and not rooted in reality. And for Bren, in my story, he understood the medical element to what was happening. But for, I guess, for families who aren't familiar with the medical elements of the process, and when that happens, it must be absolutely terrifying. So yeah, it's a very important topic, and I wanted to get it right, and I hope that I did. And then I think it's delicate when you're writing suspense or any kind of fiction, no matter how serious your fiction is, there is generally an element of it is to entertain the reader. So it's that balancing act of trying to handle topics with sensitivity, while you know that you are also trying to create a page turner of a novel. It's all a big juggling act, I think.
Yeah, I actually I want to bring up Lucy's other question.
I was gonna say Lucy's question's really like a good question. They're all good, but it's relevant to combo. Oh, I guess Jessica's not asking. Lucy wants to know, did you consider going supernatural for the story?
That is a great question, and I can understand how it came up. I'm not sure if Lucy has read the novel or not, but it's, if for anyone who has read the novel, the question of whether or not it's supernatural is a very relevant one, because there is a supernatural almost feel to the novel. Again, it toys around with reality. There's a haunted feeling to it. But for me, for my vision, I never for a second considered actually writing a supernatural story, because my preference has always been grounding my stories in our world. It just always has been. I've just never written, even when I was a little kid, I never wrote supernatural stories. I always wrote things that had a creepy feel, but at the end, there was always a human explanation for everything. So I love horror. I love that atmospheric, sort of rich, spooky, just feeling that you get when you're either watching or reading good horror. But for me, in my own work, while I'm very influenced by, you know, I guess the aesthetics and the style of horror, especially horror films, I love horror films, I'm very influenced by the aesthetics. In my stories, there's always a human, scientific reason that the strange things happened. And as I got a bit older, I realized that puts my stories firmly in the genre of psychological thriller.
Because at first, reading, listening, I was kind of like, could it be? Could this? Because the haunted feeling. But I think that's a really great thing that it shows, like, the horror influence that you have, because to me, horror, it's not just like monsters and goriness, you know, serial killer type stuff. It's the feeling, it's an emotion that gets you. I just read a story that the title was called Goosebumps, and literally it's not scary, like it's not horror, it's just, you know, really creepy, atmospheric, like you're feeling the anxiety buildup of this character. And as I'm like reading, I happened to be reading it on my phone, and I was like, oh my God, what's gonna happen? Like, oh my God. And you know, I kind of felt that with Georgina, not to the extent, because a lot of bad things were happening to the character in Goosebumps, like, and in your story, I'm kind of like, oh my God, what is happening with this family? Like, I feel for you, Georgina. Like, what is, because a lot of thrillers, especially since I'd say with Gone Girl, of the unreliable female narrator thrown in, like, it's just so interesting to see it. And I think, like, you give such a refreshing new twist on it. And like, even what you said with Brendan, his medical background of dealing with her, because you don't see that all, and it's just like, oh yeah, you know, marital troubles, you're kind of like, whatever. It could easily go into something cliche, and it doesn't. So I really enjoyed that, and just being like, what's gonna happen? Like, I typically read at night, which is horrible for my sleep cycle, but I'll end up, this is a book, like I couldn't really do it with this because I was listening, but if I was reading it, I'd be sitting in bed being like, oh my God, what, water, okay, gotta keep doing, like, it's 2:00 in the morning, I have like 5 more pages, it's fine. And then, you know, you're reading the book and you're done with it, and it's like 5:00 in the morning.
Yeah, it's so nice when people will say to me, oh, I stayed up till 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. to read it and you really cut into my sleep. And I'm like, I'm really sorry, but I'm also so flattered that you missed out on sleep to finish my book. But to get back to what you were saying about the Gone Girl kind of unreliable narrator, obviously Gillian Flynn changed the game and, captured like the zeitgeist. So, but also I feel like it predates Gone Girl. I think if we go back to like the kind of history of, Rebecca, and as we were saying, Rosemary's Baby, and these big iconic books, that thing of the unreliable narrator has its roots in those kind of classics of the genre. And also in Rebecca, it has that ghostly feel as well. I don't know how many people listening have read Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, which is such an amazing thriller, such an amazing classic thriller. And in it, for most of the book, there is that feeling of, is this house haunted? Is there a supernatural element here? And I think that those influences carry down through the generations and shape the landscape that we then end up writing thrillers in. And so these things that are tropes, and I feel like I use a lot of tropes in The Woman Outside My Door, like the ghostly feeling, the unreliable narrator, the big twist, but I hope I use them in a way that's fresh and original. But I do use the tropes, and I think I use them because we use them a lot for a reason. They make the books really, really fun to read.
They do.
Are you actually, I have to ask because we're getting close to the end, are you working on a new book at the moment?
I am, but I found it really hard because of the pandemic. Well, I found it really good to edit in quarantine where I couldn't go out, or edit in lockdown where I couldn't go out. I find it very hard to write creatively in lockdown because I just feel my brain is understimulated.
Yeah.
So I am finding it a bit of an uphill battle, but I'm hoping that I'll get it finished before too long, because every time someone DMs me and says that they're like, are you working on another one? Readers, and I'm like, I'm trying. I want to get it to you as fast as possible, because there's no bigger compliment, I think, than a reader reading your novel and immediately saying, when's the next one coming out? I really liked that one. Yeah, it's a privilege of a problem to have.
And this leads to Anonymous asked earlier in the chat of saying, is there any chance of an adaptation of your book? Because I feel like that would be a really good movie.
Yeah.
Or TV show. I'll take either or both.
I would love that. If that's what happens, there will be no one happier than me. So fingers crossed, fingers and toes crossed that that's the way it works out.
Very cool. Are there any more questions or comments before we head out? This has been really cool.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. I know our guests seem to appreciate it. Thank you for spending your dinner time with us.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for spending your lunch time with us. Or you know what? I don't know. Some people could be from other places and maybe
midnight snack time.
Maybe this is their brunch.
Oh, good.
Yeah, or not.
Texas, yeah.
Texas, yeah, which is not here. So,
welcome from Texas.
Thank you. Welcome from Texas. Thank you so much. And go to your library, go to your bookshop, bookshop.org. Is it available on Overdrive, Stacy?
I'll go check. I'm checking right now.
I don't know how it is. So the public libraries here, we have something called Overdrive, which is like an e-download system. Is it the same where you are?
Not to my knowledge. I don't think we have that.
Yes.
Yes, it is available on Overdrive. So
great.
You could read it or listen. Just letting you know, there's a wait list for the audiobook. Because audiobooks rock.
All right. Thanks again to everybody who came out. Have a wonderful rest of your
day, night,
or whatever you are doing at the moment. And thank you so much.
Wonderful weekend.
For writing The Woman Outside My Door and for talking to us about it.
Oh yeah, I have to show the cover one more time. I was forgetting to do that at the end of these things. Thank you all so much. That's the cover. And I'm so grateful to everyone who joined us, and I had a great time.
Thank you. Have a nice day, everyone. Bye.